place that knows you as God. Welcome to a place that sees who you are. We are of one mind, we are of one heart. Welcome to a place that knows the truth that God.
I dreamed of rain. Two kids are walking home after church one day. After the minister had spent the service really going heavily about the devil and Satan and hell. And one kid looks at the other and goes, "What do you think about all this Satan stuff? Think it's real?" The other kid goes, well, you know what happened with Santa Claus. It's probably just your dad. When tragedy strikes, man, ever since the shooting down in Florida, it weighed so heavy on my heart. 17 people dying. And I've been sitting with this and just sitting with this. And then the thing that I have to keep going back to is to abandon the truth in our hour of need is to not understand the truth. And the thing about the truth is that we are powerful, creative, spiritual beings creating our lives. And it's so easy to go down there and look at what happened there and go, these are victims. And yet, we teach a philosophy that says there are no victims. And I think to myself, well, what about little kids who, get stolen from their parents and horribly abused, and aren't they victims? And then I have to think to myself, well, am I saying that our teaching only works sometimes? Am I saying that this teaching, kind of comes and goes along with the circumstance? That there are some circumstances that may be outside our teaching, and thereby there's victims. Could that be possible? Could there be two things going on? Because if there are two things going on, then it's completely random. We have no say over our lives, and everything we're saying here is baloney. So the only way that this teaching holds up is if when we look at the toughest of situations, we go, well, God must be there too. There's something about this that must be for the good of all, even if we can't see it right away. And the thing about tragedy that I've noticed is that there are so many different levels and layers of it. There's the tragedy that happens to each of us personally. Then there's the tragedy that happens to somebody we love. Then there's the tragedy that happens to a group to folks that we don't know but care about. And then there's the tragedy that happens to those we don't know and actually don't care about. I mean, maybe care about them as people. But I don't see a lot on Facebook going on about the ethnic cleansing going on in Africa at this time, which involves hundreds of thousands of people, which is a much larger number than 17. So how we deal, and that is a tragedy. I mean, there are entire villages where there isn't a single girl over the age of 6 who has not been raped. And yet, I have to go back to the fact that to abandon the truth in our hour of need is to not understand the truth. And so there's a whole way in which we are with life that either we're unconscious about it or we're conscious about it. But that it still works the same, whether we're conscious about it or unconscious about it. And so it turns out that since 2013, there have been 291 shootings at schools. That is a big number. We've been focused on the number of 18, which is the amount of shootings that have happened just this year since January, which is still a large number. I mean, it's only been 2 months. In fact, the 19th shooting has already occurred. Young man in middle school, young boy in middle school, walked into school and in the center of his class put a gun in his mouth and blew off his head. Man, that's a lot of tragedy going on all the time. So our job as religious scientists is to stand in that place that might be the most useful for what is going on. It is never useful to turn to somebody else and go, how did you create this? Or to think of those kids as, how did they create that? That is not useful. What is useful is, what good can come of this? Because what's happened is a tragedy. Now, let's look at the good. Let's look at what good can come of this. Now, the thing about tragedy is, if you've noticed for yourself, I know I have for me, that distance, even in time instead of space, makes a difference in terms of our perception of what has occurred. The more distance I have from a tragedy that has happened in my life, the more I get to see a different perspective of it. Now, I know that our big teaching here is change your thinking, change your life. But I have to tell you that for me personally, it always starts with perception. Change my perception, that will change my thinking, and that will change my life. Change your perception, that will change your thinking, and that will change your life. You see what I'm saying here? And we see this all the time because every single person in this room has an event in their lives that when it happened, they saw one way. A little time passed, they saw it a little differently. And even more time passed, and they probably saw it even more differently. Right? So time and space make a difference in how we view these things. And who gets to judge when enough time has passed? People do that, right? You have a death in the family, and there was a time when the woman had to wear black for a year because somebody else made that rule. People are always trying to make rules about how others should deal with their grief. One of the ways they go about that is come on, it's time to get over this. It's been long enough. Anybody ever said that to you about some grief you were going through? And you thought to yourself, no, I'm still grieving. But then you get a little crazy in your head and start thinking, are they right? Should I be moving on? I don't know. This is a very personal process. Grief is an incredibly personal process. And I would never, ever try to steal away that process from somebody else by judging them and thinking I know better about theirs. What I do know better about is my own. And so the way science of mind works best is when we challenge ourselves instead of others in terms of how we stand with our own knowing of truth. And we can tell how deeply we know the truth by how deeply we suffer. The more you suffer, the less you're standing in truth. Truth being that we are eternal, powerful, creative, spiritual beings. As it says in our identity prayer, we were never born and cannot die because we are eternal beings. Now, I don't know about you, but I really find comfort in that. I find comfort in the knowing that there is a way in which the only people who continue to suffer after somebody dies are those of us who are left, not the person who has died. They've moved on to a greater place, to their next transition, whatever that is. And there are enough people who have had near-death experiences who have died and moved on and then come back, and they're all so similar that they tell us there's something that goes on after we leave here. It isn't just blackness. It isn't just the end. There is no end. We are eternal beings. Now, how does that serve us when we look down at Florida and what's going on here? Well, in the sense of empowerment, there was this girl, 17-year-old girl, who was in the high school where the shooting took place, named Isabella Gomez, who took a stand and said, "This is enough," and raised her voice to a point where all these other high schoolers raised their voices. And they started to make such a fuss that some of them actually got calls, saying, "Your life is in danger if you keep speaking like this." And these kids were like, "Really?" Because I thought my life was in danger when that guy came in and actually started shooting around the room. And so they have continued to make that stand. And it has been so loud that for the first time, I'm talking 291 shootings since 2013, and now, with all these adults doing everything they know to do to make something change around gun control, and all of a sudden kids are going, maybe I can't depend on my parents for this, maybe I have to do it. And for the first time in our history, we have kids standing up who are below the voting age, who are making such a powerful stand that things have already changed. There's this other kid who was in that same school named David Hogg. He's been going on TV and making a stand about the need for change, even though he's getting death threats. Him and his dad are getting death threats. But they know something. They know something at that incredibly young age that only a few people throughout history have ever known. And that is that one voice can ignite a country. One voice can begin change. Gandhi knew it. Martin Luther King knew it. Jesus knew it. These were folks who said, I'm going to create change by making sure my voice is heard. We'll see who jumps on board. And it turns out that in all three instances, quite a few people jumped on board. And so here we have these kids, and all of a sudden, there's this massive shift. I don't know if you're aware of this, but Delta Airlines, United Airlines, the Omaha Bank, which is the largest single-owned bank in the country, MetLife, all these Enterprise, Avis, Hertz, have all decided to break their ties with the NRA. 291 shootings since 2013. It took kids standing up, something brand new to occur, for change to finally begin. For the first time ever, there were Republican donors who are saying, I will not support you next election if you don't support change in gun laws. That's never happened before. It took kids standing up. So I hate that it took these 17 more to make this happen. But I have to look at history, and I have to look at what really occurs, and I have to look at our teaching and say, okay, there's something now that's actually happening, because people are courageous enough to stand up and say, no more. This is it. This is where change happens. And I love that it's kids that are below voting age who are doing this, you know? Because throughout our history, I remember back even in the 60s, nobody took somebody under 18 seriously because they couldn't vote. And that's just not the case anymore. Talk about an evolution. Talk about an evolution that is coming along, that is growing for all of us, that feels so deep within us. So, and it shows the expansion, and it shows the possibility. You talk about anything being possible, right? We talk about that here all the time, that anything is possible. And then something happens that nobody thought was possible, which is kids actually being the ones to make this thing change. And then you get another example that, of course, this is how it works. The hard part now is let's make sure we don't go back to sleep. Because just, my favorite story being those Jews who got out of Egypt. Moses comes along and does all those incredible miracles, and the Egyptians finally let the Jews free, and the first thing they do is freak out when they get to the Red Sea, going, "Oh my God, we're going to all die now." And Moses is like, haven't you seen the greatness of God? Haven't you seen what's possible? So he parts the Red Sea and they go across, closes it on the Egyptians. And then they get to the mountain and he goes up to get the 10 Commandments or do whatever he's doing up there on the mountain. And they freak out again. But we do that. It was really fun as a kid to watch that movie and go, how stupid are those Israelites that they keep forgetting? And then I have to look at my own life and go, wow, I keep forgetting too. Almost every day. There's some part of that day where I have fallen into the drama of my day and forgotten that there is a greater power going on here all the time, and it is always for my good. All I have to do is remember and wield that power. Because I get to do that in my life. I don't get to do that in yours. You get to do that for you if you remember that you actually can. Or will you buy into the next drama and go, well, just because those kids did it and made a change that can never occur, that doesn't mean I could do it in my life. Because we experience all the time stuff in our own lives. We're stepping into a place of possibility where we thought things are impossible is the most miraculous place to be. It's what makes it all possible. What's going on here in this world? One of the reasons, I'm going to backtrack a little bit here. Christine Laurie brought up a great story in our Rise Up Club that I thought, really fits what goes on with most of us in this life. The reason that big elephants are held together by these little chains is because when they're baby elephants, the chain's put on them. And they try to break it then, but then they're too small and not strong enough to break it. By the time they become adults, they think that chain will hold them, and they don't even try to break it anymore. It occurred to me that we're all doing that. With any chain, Susie spoke about the chain of democracy. The only chain of democracy is the one we forgot we could break. Because when we were at whatever age, when authority spoke to us and we listened, we bought into a reality because others told us to be realistic. And we go around thinking that material science is all there is in the world. That the physical science must work all the time just the way it does. And then there are sometimes, in these rare moments in history, somebody that goes, actually, I think there's something larger than this. My favorite Einstein quote is, you cannot create a solution with the same thinking that created the problem. It takes that leap, it takes that intuitive. So when we approach something like what happened down in Florida, we have to approach it if what we want to do is create real change from a place of our higher self. If what we're doing is reacting like, oh my God, somebody should have done, the FBI should have done this, and this person should have done this, and if that ever happens again, make sure we report them, and da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da, then all we're doing is reacting in fear with the same thing that created the thing in the first place. Are you with me on that? You don't want to get stuck doing the same thing or reacting in the same way with the same thinking. So what that creates is, what we need is to create a situation where we rise up higher. That's what these kids did. They did something that nobody thought was possible, except them. And they probably got that hit not from logic. If they were to look around their lives at the material world, what would have ever given them the thought that they could stand up and make the kind of change they did? What evidence is there in the world that would have given these kids the thought that making the kind of noise they made would make a difference? It took something higher. It took something new. And that's what is within each and every one of us. They are this incredible example of our teaching happening right here and now, because they believed that something was possible that there was absolutely no evidence for. And they are not, well, they're special in the way that they were willing to listen to that higher voice. I mean, how many times have you gotten an intuitive hit about something and not followed it? So this is about stepping into when you get that voice that says something expansive. I talk about intuition here a lot because it is that voice within you, that GPS that is guiding you to take expansive action. Guided me to talk about this, what happened in Florida, and overt it and bring forth all those things that come forth in me around it. I get messages all the time to keep talking about the ethnic cleansing going on in Africa, not letting that stuff be silent. And as long as I keep being told to do that, I'm going to keep doing that. Because so far, that's what's mine to do. If something else comes up that's mine to do, I'll find out and I'll start doing that. But that's what it is we do. We got to listen. We got to be open to that voice in each and every one of us that is larger than ourselves, that is doing everything in its power to speak to us in a way that we can heal and hear, when there are all these other voices in ourselves trying to hold us back, keep us with the only thing, we can do is that which we already have evidence for. But the true nature of expansion, the true nature of the universe, is beyond what there is evidence for. And it is the scariest place for most of us. Right? Stepping into the unknown is an incredibly scary place. I'm too old. I'm too young. I don't have enough money. There's no way I could get that. I'm tied up in this thing in a way that it has to be like this. No, none of that is true unless you make it true by standing in it and solidifying it, because you do get to do that. You can prove yourself right every single time you want to. And that's the thing about all this. That's the most powerful thing about our teaching, is your ability to prove yourself right. So what I am asking of you today is to listen to that higher voice. So if you're going to be right, let it be for possibility. Since you get to be right anyway, be outside the evidence. Step beyond it. Look beyond the veil. Grow larger. Take on something larger. These kids did. They took on something really large. They're changing the laws of our country. They have legislators who are actually saying, okay, I will vote for change for the very first time. And we have companies who have already said, I'm not with these guys anymore. That's already happened. All because kids said, I'm not buying into the evidence of what's possible. What I say to each and every one of you is that let's make those moves before the tragedy happens. Don't make it be a tragedy that gets you to do something you've never done before. Take on, going beyond who you think you are. Get out of your comfort zone. Do something different. Listen to that voice because it's guiding you. Every single one of us has it. Don't wait for a tragedy to make you do something you've never done before, or a crisis. I mean, that's what we do a lot of the time. Real change tends to happen out of crisis. But it doesn't have to be that way. We get to make that change within each of our lives simply by taking on the idea that that's what we get to do. Because you get to be right. So be right in possibility, beyond what you think is possible. And let's rise together. I love you. All right, take out what you're going to give and hold it in your hand. Unfold it. Unfold it. Because this is God too. And you don't want to crinkle up what you say is God. This is the law of circulation in action. What you give out returns to you multiplied abundantly. This is your opportunity to get that law in motion, to get the giving and receiving flowing in bigger and bigger ways, because the more you give, the more you receive. And let's do our affirmation together. God is the source of all supply. Money is God in action. What we give, we receive multiplied abundantly. All that God is, I am. And so it is.
You are the face of God. I hold you in my heart. You are a part of me. You are the